After having won his case against the Edison Trust, he became one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. She was the first woman to play the role of a vamp and to launch the famous line, "Kiss me, you fool." It was the end of the First World War and its millions of dead. The First Industrial War allowed the economy and science to make a huge leap forward, a paradox of humanity. After this conflict, men started to live better and women started to enjoy new freedoms. A new era was beginning, creating an explosion of creativity. New movements and trends emerged, and their common point was freedom of expression and the will to leave behind the familiar territory of traditional art. The Surrealists, Bauhaus, Jazz, Picasso, Modigliani, Mondrian, Satie, Cocteau, Man Ray, and Isadora Duncan. There was Art Deco and its architectural feats, the Louise Brooks hairstyle, fashioned by Poiret, and the creation of Chanel No. 5. Until 1914, Europe was the home of cinema, from Méliès to the German Expressionists. The old continent was a real breeding ground for cinema. But the 1914-1918 war allowed the Americans to become the biggest film producers in the world in just 3 years. Under pressure from censorship committees and virtue leagues, scenarios became more and more sterile and conventional, so as to preserve the integrity of the family and moral values. Despite this Puritanism, the films that William Fox produced for Theda Bara struck a deep chord with the women of this time. Women's intelligence and their powers of seduction became new weapons, helping them gain their independence.
When I look back on my past, a smile full of irony comes to my lips. What a strange path my life took. The image of the women that I played in my films fundamentally transformed the mentality and the moral standards in fashion in the years just after 1915. The Victorian tradition which reigned at the time locked women into a prison of rules and duties, each more constraining than the last. Until I appeared on cinema screens. I incarnated the vamp, the evil creature who takes men's energy and who only lives for her own pleasure. I made those who approached me suffer. I ridiculed their honor and destroyed their families. I, who was the very opposite of those femmes fatales, I, who was faithful to my husband, I, who adored reading, yes, I was the symbol of the growing independence of women at the beginning of the century. It was thanks to my performances in the cinema that women realized that they had an identity of their own. Me, the little girl of Polish and Swiss origin, I was the one who changed the mentalities of half the population of the United States. What a paradox. My father left Poland in 1871 to emigrate to New York, the promised land. There he met my mother and married her in 1882. He became a tailor, and my mother made wigs with real human hair. On the 29th of July, 1885, I came into the world. Little Theodosia Goodman, nicknamed Theda by my parents. We lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. In 1898, we celebrated my bar mitzvah. Although I'm not a practicing Jew, I do feel a certain pride in being born Jewish. I had a strong personality, and I convinced my parents to let me study. Don't laugh. Not many women went to university in 1905. But I had already been bitten by the theater bug. That's where I spent all of my free time. From Alan Asimova to Sarah Bernhardt, the great actresses fascinated me. Their independence, the love they gave to the audience. I felt that I too could embody the spirit of my time and become a great actress. My father doubted my ability to act, and how right he was. I'm no natural. I was born with a solid sense of humor and a will of iron, which allowed me to calmly wait for my 30th birthday before the doors of glory finally opened and men finally heaped mounds of flowers and rivers of diamonds at my feet. All of that after meeting William Fox, the founder of the studios of the same name, on the brink of bankruptcy, a fact which he didn't care to admit until after I signed my contract.
Yes, I was on the brink of bankruptcy. And so what? When you want to make big money, you have to play big money. I understood this rule very early. When I was born in Hungary in 1880, my parents were poor, very poor, and decided to leave Europe for the new continent. But the El Dorado was just a dream, and poverty was still very real in a lower New York infested with rats. Of my 12 brothers and sisters, only 6 managed to survive. We didn't eat every day, and my parents couldn't bring us up well. I educated myself and was working from an early age. Childhood made way for adolescence. From errand boy, I became a tailor. I had a head for business, and little by little, I managed to get my family out of this hell. One day, an advertising board caught my eye. One of those funny hangers where you can see little films was for sale. The year was 1904. I invested all my savings, almost $1,600, to buy it from Stuart Blackstone of Vitagraph. The idea of making this entertainment accessible to everyone seemed like a good way of making money to me. But Stuart hadn't explained everything, and the trouble started the very next day. The customers of the Nickelodeons were mostly men. Most were unemployed, alcoholics, and outcasts. In short, every kind of illegal traffic took place there, safely hidden from the prying eyes of the police. I decided to give it a complete overhaul and to propose films intended in priority for families. My intuition was good, and the audiences changed, with the help of a few doormen to reassure everyone. My little business was working so well that in the space of a few years, I had 15 theaters. I was earning a good living, but I also saw that the producers who rented the films to me made much bigger profits. Only that was the thing. An organization called the Patent Company, run by Joe Kennedy, Gloria Swanson's future lover, ruled over cinematographic production and imposed exorbitant taxes on independents. I decided to go to court to attack this trust composed of the biggest producers: Edison, Biograph, Vitagraph, Essene Méliès, Pathé. To everyone's surprise, I won my case. We were free, and the $300,000 of damages quickly went into buying more theaters, and especially into producing feature films. Dustin Farnham, who acted in Cecil B. DeMille's first film, The Squaw Man, had the same blood group as me. It was thanks to him that I survived a serious traffic accident. Out of gratitude, I offered him a life contract. J. Gordon Edwards, the grandfather of Blake Edwards, directed most of my films. The money which came flowing in was spent straight away on new productions and on movie tone, a new technique which allowed the spectator to hear a soundtrack in sync with the pictures. This technical feat swallowed up a mountain of money, and I soon found myself on the brink of bankruptcy. That's when Frank Powell introduced me to Theodosia Goodman, a little theater actress.
When William Fox met the person who was going to become Theda Bara, he didn't know yet that it was going to be thanks to her that his company would become #1 in a few months and make him more than $250 million. Johnny Goldfrapp, the public relations manager at Fox, had a great idea. Nobody would have put their money on a chubby little actress from Cincinnati, but he decided to create a myth. Little Theodosia Goodman, born in Ohio, became Theda Bara, an anagram of Arab death. Born of a French mother and an explorer father under the kindly gaze of the Sphinx at Giza in Egypt, the little girl had all the necessary ingredients to set the spectators dreaming. Theda was an intelligent woman and saw what she could make out of it by playing along with the company. Soon the press were rushing to cover the story of this strange actress who posed with snakes, smoked cigars, and burned incense in her dressing room, which resembled a palace chamber from 1001 Nights. The first pre-made star had been created. Frank Powell wrote and directed a cinema adaptation based on the canvas by Philip Burne-Jones in Vampire, the poem by Rudyard Kipling. It was 1915, and Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith was knocked off the #1 spot by Fox's new film, A Fool There Was. In a few days, Theda Bara became the public's favorite actress. There is only one actor who entered into the history books like this from one day to the next, thanks to a new image of the representation of sexuality, Rudolph Valentino.
In A Fool There Was, I don't play a woman, no. I am the vampire. Quite a symbol. My character seduced men, taking advantage of them and destroying their happiness. John Schuler is a happy man. He's a reputed lawyer and he loves his wife and child. Everything is going perfectly for him. But fate has decided to complicate things, and our hero sees himself being offered a diplomatic post in England. How can he refuse? Unfortunately, his family has to stay in the United States. That's where I come in. Me, the instrument of fate, who is going to compromise him. Once he is snared in my net, I weave a web around him that prevents him from leaving me. One scene contrasts with the melodramatic atmosphere of the film, the performance of an attack of delirium tremens, which resembles an epileptic fit. As with the lipstick and face powder, our way of acting exaggerated the effects.
At the time, actors belonged to one of two schools. The naturalist method of Konstantin Stanislavski, whose most famous pupil was Alla Nazimova, and who required actors to use their own life experiences to interpret a character. The other method was that of François del Sarte, followed by Ethel Barrymore, La Douze, or Theda Bara, and which recommended never moving when another actor was speaking and to stand still while reciting one's text. Joy, anger, or love were caricatured on the screen. There were numerous constraints, and very few actors capable of leaving this rigid framework. They also had to provide their own jewelry, makeup, and costumes. In A Fool There Was, Theda Bara had 10. She spent her whole fee on them, but after the success of the film at the box office, Fox gave in to all her whims and pushed her to play these cursed women that the public expected to see. Carmen by Raoul Walsh in 1915, Camille by J. Gordon Edwards in 1917, Madame du Barry, Salome, and above all, Cleopatra. Theda Bara was to be the first woman to play the famous Queen of Egypt. Her films were popular and made enormous profits. William Fox became rich, very rich, and the New York Times in March 1917 estimated his fortune at $250 million.
I was now the head of two distinct entities. The first, Fox Films, was specialized in low-budget films with untypical stars like Theda Bara or Tom Mix, the most popular cowboy of the United States. And the second, 20th Century Fox, in collaboration with Daryl Zanuck. I became the equal of the moguls, the big bosses of Hollywood. We all started in the same way, thanks to an actor or an actress who had the unique gift of being able to represent the era they lived in. David Ward Griffith launched Lillian Gish and with Birth of a Nation revolutionized the cinema industry. Jesse Lasky and Adolph Zukor of Paramount made their fortune with Mary Pickford, America's Little Dolly, and became the first to industrialize the profession. Carl Laemmler, the founder of Universal Studios, made a fortune thanks to Erich von Stroheim, who directed and acted in Foolish Wives. Louis B. Mayer and Irving Thalberg made Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer into the most prestigious studio in the world, with stars like Greta Garbo. For me, it was with Theda Bara that I was able to build up Fox. The 30 or so films that we made together, not forgetting one of the first animation films, A Meeting with Theda Bara, allowed me to make my dream come true, to own my own studio. My films weren't for the intelligentsia. I never did my productions for city dwellers. Straightforward scenarios, opposing good and evil, often simplistically, but pleasing everyone. That was my credo. In 1927, I produced Sunrise, directed by Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau. Those intellectuals at Paramount and MGM are still kicking themselves. This film is one of my proudest achievements. It depicts a rural world where passion and love are corrupted by the city. I hired John Ford, and his film The Iron Horse was his first success as a director. My films sold well, and contrary to my competitors, I also invested in real estate. In 1928, I became associates with Marcus Lowe's, the owner of more than 2,000 movie theaters. I thought that I had finally made it, but fate was waiting in the background. And it was in October, while I was driving to the East Coast to meet Marcus Lowe's, that I heard the horrible news.
Although until then the film shoots took place around New York, for Salome, William Fox decided to emigrate to the West Coast, to California. In 1919, there wasn't a museum or a library. I suddenly found myself without anything to satisfy my curiosity, and the women were far from being as emancipated as they were where I came from. But I earned more than $4,000 a week, and when Salome came out, it was a success. 3 years later, the great Alla Nazimova released her version of Oscar Wilde's tale. It was modern, very aesthetic, and out of step with the times, and a dreamlike story far from the version that I had been in. A few months later, I met Charles Brabin, one of the directors at Fox. Everyone called him Lord or Sir. He directed me in Kathleen Mavoureen, an Irish story. And that's when I asked William Fox for a raise. After all, I am the one who got his company off the ground. But he refused, arguing Catholic virtue leagues would lodge a complaint and boycott the film and perhaps cause his ruin. I left him and regained my independence. In 1922, David O. Selznick, age 20 at the time, was courting me assiduously. He offered me a role in one of his films, but I refused. Paradoxically, I was far from the image projected in my films, and I stayed faithful to Charles, although he was far from me in Italy, where he was directing Ben-Hur. He was replaced by Fred Niblo. When MGM was created in 1924, I acted in The Unchastened Woman, a dramatic comedy about infidelity, a subject very much in vogue. Carolyn, my character, discovers with joy that she is expecting. But she finds out on the same occasion that her husband is cheating on her. she decides to go to Europe to bring up her child on her own. Having become a very prominent woman, she returns to her country to take revenge on her husband. But love triumphs, the mistress is banned, and the child is reunited with his father. I no longer corresponded to the canons of the time, and the studios turned their backs on me. Until the day when the producer, Hal Roach, offered me a role in a comedy. He launched the very beautiful Jean Harlow, who disappeared suddenly a few years later. But it was his collaboration with Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy that marked his beginnings. Stan, as it happens, directed our first film, Madam Mystery, where I played alongside Oliver Hardy. I was a spy pursued by a band of thieves. I try to get away in a boat because they want me to steal a new kind of bomb. During the robbery, one of them swallows the bomb. Action stations on the ship. In the end, it turns out to be just helium, and the explosion transforms my thief into a balloon. Audiences liked the film, but Charles forbade me to continue. Madam Mystery was to be my last film.
In 1926, a new vamp was making the screens dazzle, and although she may have never acted Shakespeare, Greta Garbo was to leave a deep mark on the great book of cinema. Theda Bara enjoyed her years of freedom. In 1949, Billy Wilder offered her a role alongside Montgomery Clift in a film about Hollywood in the old days. In the end, it was Gloria Swanson and William Holden who acted in Sunset Boulevard. At the beginning of the 50s, Charles and Theda moved to Beverly Hills, and their neighbor never knew that the nice old lady who took such care of her rose bushes had been Fox's first vamp.
All the papers on the 28th October 1929 had the same cover, the Wall Street crash. The shares that I had bought at $120 2 months beforehand suddenly were worth 50 cents. I was ruined. My associates encouraged me to sell my stake so as to save Fox. In March 1930, I was no longer the boss of my own company. For better or for worse, I got $18 million back. But in 1932, the new bosses of Fox, Harley Clark, and Edward Tinker brought me to court for having declared false accounts and for abuse of company property. How shameful. Me, the creator of the Fox Studios, I was condemned to pay them millions in compensation. The IRS wasn't far behind and was also looking for several $1 million. And my lawyers finished off what was left. How the mighty had fallen. I was reduced to spending 6 months in prison at the Lewisburg Penitentiary. I was destroyed.
Forgotten by everyone, William Fox perhaps owed his fall to the fact that he always wanted to be a loner. Even the lords of Hollywood have to obey rules. They are merciless to those who don't follow them. During his first trip to Los Angeles, William Fox was traveling in the company of Loretta Young, the heroine of The Stranger, directed by Orson Welles. Cameras were flashing around the star when a passenger approached a photographer and told him that William Fox was also on the plane. The journalists looked at each other and someone asked him then, "But who is William Fox?" The irony of fate which sees to it that the builders of cathedrals always remain forgotten. William Fox, the little Hungarian Jew who discovered Theda Bara, died alone in 1952 in New York. Theda passed away from liver cancer on the 7th of April, 1955. She came away unscathed from passing glory. Faithful to her husband, balanced, and with a lively mind, she calmly lived an extraordinary existence. Her one regret was that she never became a mother. Years later, her style is still pleasing, and she must smile when she sees her effigy remind us of her. Theda Bara will forever remain the pioneer of all the vamps in the history of cinema and the first star launched thanks to her marketing and publicity campaign. Her collaboration with William Fox allowed for 20th Century to become one of the great studios, and for once, one of the most incredible pages in the history of Hollywood was to be written by a duet.